Hello, guys. Now listen, this system that we're in right now is getting ready to deleverage. It's going to do so very soon, probably before 2018 is finished. And what I mean by deleverage is everything in this system has been leveraged up. Unbelievable. Not just the derivatives products, but everything. Everything is leveraged. Everything that people do not really fully own is completely leveraged within the system. Your businesses, everything that the banks have anything to touch or anything to do with, anything that's tied into the dollar has been leveraged up. Completely leveraged. And so the only thing that's not leveraged is real assets that have no counterparty risk. This is the only thing in the system right now that's not leveraged. This system is going to deleverage. And what the problem is going to create is I'll try to explain it this way. The banks have all linked themselves together. Picture in your mind a whole bunch of ships that are out on the ocean. There's small ships, there's big ships, and there's big monster ships like the Queen Mary or the Titanic-sized ships. Now picture this whole ocean full of ships. Right? And all the ships, they are able to talk to one another, and this is the way the banking system was, like 50 years ago. They were able to communicate with one another via radio or whatever. And they're all on the ocean. They're all floating on the ocean, these ships. And the ships are like the banks. There's big banks, would be like the big ships. And the smaller ships would be like the smaller banks, okay? So this is what the banks were like. And they were floating on this ocean of liquidity, which would be money. What happened was the banks had come up with a great idea. They said, listen, we all have a risk of sinking. Like the ships. They call it to the other captain. They says, we have a risk of sinking. I got a great idea. What we'll do is we'll take chains and we'll weld them to the decks of our ship, these big chains, and we'll weld it to your ship over there, the chain. And then we'll weld it to the other guy's ship over there, the chain. And we'll weld it to all the ships here in the harbor. We'll chain them all together with these chains. Right? And the one ship captain, he says, this is a good idea because if one of the smaller ships start to sink, the chains will keep it from sinking so that we can get over there and rescue the smaller ship. So none of us will sink anymore because we'll chain ourselves together so that none of us can sink anymore. Right? And it sounds like a great idea. So they go about welding all these chains to all the ships in the harbor, making them like one big ship. This is your banking system. And the chains are actually the derivatives products that they've created. And what they've done is they've leveraged the system up, financially speaking, so that the monetary base is actually far greater than the assets available to cover what the monetary base is. So we're looking at, now get this number that I'm going to say right now, over a quadrillion. That's $1,000 trillion. They've leveraged the system up that high. Over a quadrillion in derivatives products. These are the chains that the banks have tied themselves together with. And so, if one of these big banks go down, that they call too big to fail, and one of the biggest is Deutsche Bank, it's going to drag the whole system down with it. If the stock market goes down really, really bad, it's going to drag the whole system down with it. And it's because what they've done is in this leverage, they have all of these things out there that they assess the value of. Okay? Value assessment. So they might come to your house, and they might assess the value of your house at, say, $500,000. This is the assessment of your house. But now let's just say there's no buyers and you're forced to liquidate into the system, your house. Say some weekend comes and forced liquidation, margin call on your house. And say it's worth $500,000, right? But there's no buyers. You might only be able to find one qualified buyer in town. He's only willing to pay $50,000 for your house. That's the bid on a market-to-market basis. That's the bid for your house. So now, picture this spreading through the entire financial system. This assessment of value, what things are actually really worth. This is a meltdown of the financial system because there's going to be no buyers. Everybody's going to be frightened. They're going to pull their money back. And when they pull their money back, that means there's no buyers because of the fear. Everything has to be liquidated on a market-to-market basis. The system melts down. This is what happened in 2008, and this is what's going to happen again. This is what's coming. What you think your house is worth is only what it's worth if you've got somebody to buy it for that price. When this system melts down, there's going to be no buyers, no liquidity. The valuations on everything is just going to astronomically fall. So now you say to yourself, when this system melts down and these banks actually go down with it, these too big to fail banks start to actually collapse, because right now their capital allocations, first tier capital and so on, is all measured by leverage. And so when they take these stress tests, the numbers that they're giving these stress tests to make them all seem solvent, like they can take the next financial crisis or whatever, is all balderdash. It's all foolishness. It's all baloney. And the reason why is because when this system melts down, the assets that they're measuring that against are going to melt down with it, and they're not going to be worth a 1/10 of what they're assessed at. And the banks are all going to find themselves suddenly in big trouble. So what do we do with all this? Well, it's fine and well. They've said, okay, we're not going to do a bailout anymore. We're going to do bail-ins when this next crisis comes. And they put the legislation in for all these banks. But when it really comes down to it, and the time actually hits and these banks have melted down, they're not going to do bail-ins. We're going to be faced with a situation where if the central bank, which is the lender of last resorts, does not step in, the system is going to stay melted down, and we're going to go into a Mad Max world where everything melts down with it. Because everything runs on money. The truckers, the just-in-time distribution systems that bring your food to the grocery stores, all runs on money. All the trucking companies all run on money. And the money all supplied by the banks. And the banks, in turn, are all linked into this system. And if it melts down for too long of a period of time, even the power companies will go, everything, the power grid, everything will go into chaos, and everybody would die. You get it's a mass extinction event, actually, to tell you the truth, because after about 2 or 3 weeks, the cities would just become melted down. The cities would melt down. If we want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, if the central banks do not react to this, and if they let the system melt down, and they don't not respond, and they decide to just not do any bail-ins or anything, or bailouts, if they don't do any bailouts and they let the system melt down completely, and they don't fix it, the cities, all the big cities, they have a water supply in these cities. They keep it pressurized with tanks that are up in the air on big towers. And it's a simple system. And they have pumps. They have auxiliary pumps that will run even if the power's out, to run off of diesel fuel. Okay, and auxiliary systems. Now, there's a few problems with this. I'll tell you what the problems are. First off, they don't run these systems very often. And when they first start them up, the water comes brown. The water's brown that comes through them. And it when they first start them up, because they to run them, if they haven't run them in quite a while, generally they don't run them every day. They just test them maybe once every 6 months to make sure that they work. So they start these systems up. Say the power goes out on the power grid to a big city. Well, they're going to be able to keep water pressure for a few days because of their tank system. But then when the water pressure starts to fail, they're going to have to go over to the auxiliary system, which is big diesel pumps. And they run off of diesel, and they don't require the power to be up and power grid to be up and running. They can run on their own. When they start these systems up, the big diesel engines, chug, 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 you know, big pumps, you're going to find brown water. It's going to come through. It's going to smell like eggs, rotten eggs. It's going to come through the pipes. But that'll run for a while, maybe a week or two, until they run out of diesel. Ultimately, the water will stop to the city after probably 2 or 3 weeks of the power grid being down. The water will stop to the city. And that's when the real chaos ensues, because people cannot go for more than 48 hours without something to drink. 48 hours, you die. That quick. Now, if you can imagine a city without water, without any water, a big city. And so if the power grid goes down for more than a couple weeks, it's going to be really bad. Really bad. Because the highways leading out of these big cities will get plugged. They're plugged right now anyway. If you live in one of these big cities, you know traffic. Have you seen traffic jams during rush hour? And this is just normal. This is not what would happen in a panic situation when everybody's trying to get out of the city. And people are hitting one another and causing big accidents and stuff. And then they're running out of fuel because they're waiting in line for the police to come, and there's big accidents and stuff on the freeway leading out of the city, and they've been idling there so long, then their vehicle runs out of fuel, and then that creates another snag. And then the next guy, he runs out of fuel, and then they all run out of fuel, and they all get out of their vehicles, and the doors are all open, and they're walking down the sides of the freeway. This is the kind of world we're looking at. And then they start doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Because they are going crazy because they can't get their medication. And they're out of water. This is the kind of world we might be looking at if the Federal Reserve does not do something when this crisis hits, when these derivatives packages and these derivatives products melt down during a deleveraging of the system. Now, what I say is, I say that the Federal Reserve will do something. They're going to respond. And this is what I believe that they're going to do. They're going to respond. And they're going to stop this from happening so that the cities do not go through this crisis. Because it would be on their head. Let's put it this way. If they allowed that kind of crisis to happen, the people, after the crisis is over, would hold them responsible for the greatest crisis in world history. The people would hold them responsible if they allowed it to happen. Because they are responsible. They are the ones in charge of the money supply. And so, after the crisis is over, if they did not do anything, if they just sat there and allowed this kind of crisis to unfold, Crazyville crisis, after the crisis is ended, it might take 3, 4, 5 years after it's ended, but there would be tribunals. There would be judgment for the ones responsible for letting it happen. So they're not going to let it happen. They're not going to let it happen. It's not going to happen. The cities are not going to melt down. The world's not going to melt down. They're not going to let it happen. They're going to have our back. But the question is now, how do they have our back? How does the Fed have our back? And I'm going to tell you how they have our back. There's only one tool that they have. They are able to create liquidity, and they are able to get these banks and the derivatives products back up out of the hole that's going to come when this system deleverages. This is going to create a black hole that's in the trillions of dollars, this deleveraging. Many, many, many trillions. A black hole. So last time they had to create like $700 billion and quick, the Federal Reserve. This time it's going to be 10 times or more. Now, what's going to be the effect of them coming in and fixing this? Well, the immediate effect is all of that money is going to shoot the stock market up like crazy. And then when everybody finds out about what they've had to do to fix this, the tremendous leverage that they've put back into the system. See, the system's going to deleverage, and then they're going to re-leverage it with greater leverage than it had before it deleveraged. They don't have any other choice other than to let it melt down. They can't let it melt down. I just explained to you why. It would be Mad Max time if they let it melt down. If they let it continue melting down, they got to step in. Just like they did in 2008. They stepped in. They will step in again. They've already showed you what they're going to do. They've already told you what they're going to do. They've come on. Ben Bernanke said, hey, you know what? If this system starts to melt down, we will dump many out of helicopters if we have to in order to stop it from melting down. He's already told you. So, I mean, how stupid do we have to be if we don't believe what they're telling us? If we think that they're going to just sit back there and let this thing melt down into a deflationary crisis without doing anything, you're wrong. They're going to do something. And what they do is going to have a profound opposite effect. But you got to wait until after they do it, you see, because we're going to be in the middle of the deflation when they do it. And they're going to take everybody by surprise, even though they've already told everybody what they're going to do ahead of time. And even though if we use a bit of simple logic, we know that they're going to fix this, and we know they got our back, still, for some reason, we go out there and we think that the deflation is going to last forever when it hits. For some reason, we just can't see that they are going to fix it until they fix it. It's almost what I'll give you an analogy of what it's similar to. It's similar to the debt ceiling. Do you remember a couple years ago, everybody was worried about the debt ceiling? Oh, they're going to let the debt go, and the United States is going to go bankrupt, and we're going to do this and do that, right? They're not going to let that happen. Just like the Fed's not going to let this meltdown continue. They're going to come into the rescue. But what's it going to take? The amount of money that this is going to take to turn this thing around is going to have a profound effect. And that effect is going to be to create a hyperinflation. It's going to be the final death knell of the dollar. The hyperinflation is going to come. It's going to strike. When it first starts striking, we're going to have a bit of an economic recovery. But then things are going to get worse and worse, and this is going to destroy the middle-class people out there. It's going to destroy your savings. It's going to destroy your bank accounts. It's going to take all of your savings for retirement, and it's going to blow it to pieces. And if you're invested in the dollar, it's going to be toast for you. The only way you're going to get out of this is if you are into assets that do not have any third-party risk. The assets where you hold it in your hand, like probably one of the best things that you can have is physical silver in your possession. When this thing hits, probably going to be one of the best things that you can have to help preserve your wealth through this. It's going to be better than gold. The reason why it's going to be better than gold is because right now the gold to silver ratio is out of whack. I'll call it out of whack. The gold to silver ratio is about 80 to 1, 75, 80 to 1. It should be 10 to 1. But it's going to go back to about 30 to 1. And so you're going to gain just on that alone. But the price of gold is going to go to the moon. So you're going to gain and gain again if you got silver. Silver's good. Silver's going to be great through this crisis. It's going to be really great, you know. Cryptocurrencies are going to do really good on the other side after the Fed comes back to the rescue of the monetary system. cryptocurrencies then are going to go to the moon. They're going to do really well too. What's not going to do good is the dollar. Because how they're going to fix this is they're going to print the dollar until the dollar's dead. Until they can get themselves out of debt and completely deleverage the system. There's two ways that the system can be deleveraged. One is deflationary deleveraging. This is what's going to happen. But the second way is by them printing themselves out of debt and destroying the dollar. They've deleveraged the system because they're able to actually print their way out of debt. The government's going to love this. And why is because all of these unfunded liabilities that the government has, like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and on and on and on it goes, they're going to be able to pay all of that. Now, can you imagine if they didn't pay any of that? How much trouble they would be in? This is why I can tell you for an absolute certainty that they're not going to allow this to continue. They're going to fix it with monetary policy. Because that way they'll be able to pay all their unfunded liabilities, and they won't have the old people chasing them down the street with a cane, because they will have paid the old people their Social Security check. There's only one problem is, that Social Security check that they're going to pay you is not going to have the buying power it has now. It's not even going to have 1/10 of the buying power it has now when they're done with it. So what's going to happen at the end of that is we're going to have another crisis. So we're going to have the first crisis when the system melts down and the derivatives melt down and everything. It's going to be a very short crisis. Short little crisis. It's going to come fast and it's going to go fast because they're not going to allow it to continue very long. But what that's going to do is that's going to lead to an economic recovery. And then that economic recovery is going to lead to the bigger crisis, which is going to be the hyperinflation. And the hyperinflation is going to last longer. It's going to be actually worse, ultimately, because it's going to destroy all the middle-class people. It's going to make some people rich, and it's going to break other people. Everybody who's invested in the dollar is going to break you. But then what's going to happen after that is a hyperinflation is going to be ended. When they release the new cryptographic currencies, backed by the United States government, and the other governments will release their own versions too. And then what they're going to do is they're going to give you a limited amount of period to take your old dollars that have become almost worthless and trade them in. So you'll be able to drive to your bank and put your name, John Henry, on one piece of paper, and they'll transfer your whole bank account over to the new cryptographic currency. And they'll put it on your phone for you. The bank will do it for you. Probably, more than likely. And you'll be able to use that as payment. It's going to be just like what Maduro's, the first guy that's doing this, the first government that's doing this is doing this already. Right now. It's called a Petro. Venezuela. Maduro. He's doing exactly what they're going to do. He's just went through a hyperinflation. They're just a bit ahead of us, that's all. All of us are going to catch up to them and be doing the same thing. But a year or two from now, when after the hyperinflation ravages us, just like the hyperinflation ravaged Venezuela. If you want to see what this whole situation is going to play out like, watch Venezuela and look at how poor the people are in Venezuela. This is what it's going to do, right? But there's going to be people who make out good in all this because gold and silver are going to be the thing. You know, it's going to be the thing, man. Gold and silver during this, and cryptocurrency is going to do good too. But this is going to be like nothing you've ever lived through in your life. So thank you guys for listening. Like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next show. Bye.